Federal agents. Open the door. Who's there? We're in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner. ICE. We have information there's an undocumented individual inside. Open the door now or we force entry. My entire family is American citizens. You have the wrong address. Step aside, sir. We're coming in. Do you have a warrant? Show me a warrant. We don't need a warrant. Step back. I am a federal prosecutor with the United States Department of Justice. You will not enter this home without a warrant. Show me the document authorizing this entry. Sir, I'm telling you one more time. Show me the warrant or get off my property. We're coming in anyway. Senior ICE field agent Derek Salerno had been with Immigration and Customs Enforcement for 6 years when he walked up a driveway in Atlanta's Buckhead neighborhood on Thanksgiving evening and made a decision that would end his federal career, expose him and his partner to criminal charges carrying up to 35 years in prison, and cost the United States government $4.7 million. He was 34 years old, experienced enough to know better, trained enough to understand the Fourth Amendment, and arrogant enough to believe that a family's Thanksgiving table was no obstacle. One Thursday evening in November, Salerno responded to an anonymous tip, unverified, uncorroborated, and almost certainly fabricated, about an undocumented individual at a home on Habersham Road, NW. The man who answered the door was Marcus Webb, 18-year veteran of the Department of Justice, senior trial attorney in the Civil Rights Division, and the man who had personally prosecuted 3 federal cases involving illegal searches. What Salerno did next, forcing entry without a warrant, handcuffing a federal prosecutor in front of his children, and terrorizing a family of American citizens at their own dinner table, would become a landmark case in Fourth Amendment law, a Department of Justice internal scandal, and proof that the machinery of federal enforcement can destroy itself when wielded without accountability. A black man in his late 40s, Marcus Webb, was standing at the front door of his own home in a pressed Oxford shirt and slacks, still holding a dish towel from helping clear the Thanksgiving table when federal agents appeared on his porch. His wife and 2 children were visible through the entryway behind him. His mother-in-law was still seated at the dinner table. There was no crime, no threat, no undocumented individual, just a man protecting his family's holiday from agents who arrived without a warrant and left without their careers. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. 4312 Habersham Road, NW, sits in the heart of Buckhead, Atlanta's most affluent neighborhood, in a quiet residential stretch where every home sits well back from the street, screened by magnolias and well-maintained hedgerows. Buckhead is the kind of neighborhood that houses judges, corporate attorneys, surgeons, and city officials, a community defined by professional success and the quiet assumption of privacy. The houses on Habersham are brick colonials and craftsman estates, the kind of places where property values are measured in the millions, and the streets are safe enough that children ride bikes without supervision. It was 6:38 p.m. on a Thursday in late November. The sky over Atlanta had gone dark early, the way it does in autumn, and the neighborhood had that particular Thanksgiving stillness. No traffic, no foot traffic, most houses glowing warm orange from inside. A few neighbors still had their outdoor lights on. The Webb home had 2 cars in the driveway, a third at the curb, and the unmistakable sound of a family gathering audible from the porch. The smell of sweet potato pie and turkey drifted through the slightly cracked front windows. A wreath hung on the door. Inside, 14 people had gathered for the holiday meal. Marcus and Nadia Webb, their 2 children, Jonah, 14, and Amara, 8. Nadia's mother, 2 of Marcus's brothers and their spouses, and 4 cousins. The table was set. The prayers had been said. The food was being cleared. It was, by every measure, a completely ordinary American Thanksgiving. The kind of evening that ends quietly, with football and leftovers and children falling asleep on the couch. And then the knock came. Marcus Anthony Webb had been an attorney with the United States Department of Justice for 18 years. 18 years of federal service that began when he passed the bar in his home state of Georgia and joined the DOJ's honors program as one of fewer than 150 attorneys selected nationwide from thousands of applicants. That distinction alone told you something about Marcus Webb. It told you he wasn't average. It told you he had been evaluated, scrutinized, and selected by one of the most competitive federal hiring processes in the country and come out the other side. He'd spent his first 4 years in the DOJ's criminal division before transferring to the civil rights division, where he found the work that would define his career. In 18 years, he had led prosecutions in 31 federal civil rights cases involving law enforcement misconduct, hate crimes, unconstitutional searches, and patterns of systemic discrimination. He had argued before the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals 7 times. He had testified before Congress twice, once on Fourth Amendment protections in the digital age, and once on the use of excessive force by federal agencies. He had been awarded the Attorney General's Award for Excellence, the highest honor a DOJ attorney can receive, twice. His supervisors called him meticulous. His colleagues called him the attorney you wanted across the table if you were trying to negotiate a settlement, and on your side if you were going to trial. Federal judges in the Northern District of Georgia knew his name before he introduced himself. At 48 years old, Marcus Webb had spent nearly 2 decades enforcing the civil rights laws he now found himself needing to invoke at his own front door. His wife, Dr. Nadia Webb, was a board-certified cardiologist at Emory University Hospital, where she'd practiced for 15 years. They'd purchased the Habersham Road home 7 years prior, after Nadia's practice expanded and their second child was born. The neighborhood was chosen for its school district and its proximity to both Emory and the Richard B. Russell Federal Building downtown, where Marcus kept his office. They were known by their neighbors. They were embedded in their community. Their children had grown up on that street. That Thanksgiving, Marcus Webb had been in the kitchen for most of the afternoon. He'd made his grandmother's corn pudding recipe from memory, overseen the turkey with his older brother Raymond, and spent 45 minutes on a video call with his youngest cousin who was studying abroad in London. He was, in every possible sense, exactly where he was supposed to be. He was home. He was with his family. He was celebrating a national holiday in a home he owned outright, on a street he lived on, surrounded by people he loved. His credentials were in his home office upstairs. His government-issued laptop was on his desk. His DOJ identification badge was clipped to his briefcase in the front closet. None of that should have mattered. A man does not need to prove he lives in his own home to federal agents who have no legal authority to be at his door. But Marcus Webb already knew what was coming the moment he heard the words, federal agents. He'd prosecuted enough of these cases to recognize the shape of one forming in real time. But to 2 agents standing on his porch with a piece of paper they believed was sufficient authority, Marcus Webb's status as a federal prosecutor was not yet known, and that, in their minds, made him just another obstacle. Agent Derek Salerno was 34 years old. He'd been a field agent with ICE's Atlanta Enforcement and Removal Operations Unit for 6 years, hired after 4 years with a regional police department in suburban Tennessee. He was described by his supervisors as results-oriented and highly motivated, which in the language of law enforcement performance reviews often means something more precise. He had arrest numbers that looked good in quarterly reports, and his supervisors had not examined too carefully how those numbers were produced. In 6 years with ICE's Atlanta ERO unit, Salerno had compiled a record that should have raised concerns at every level of supervision. 9 complaints. 9. 7 of them involved allegations of unlawful or warrantless entry, use of excessive force during enforcement actions, or civil rights violations against individuals or families who were later confirmed to be American citizens or lawful permanent residents. 2 had been sustained, resulting in written counseling and mandatory retraining. The remaining 7 had been closed without action. In 4 of those cases, the internal review officer had noted insufficient documentation to sustain the complaint, despite witness statements and, in 2 instances, cell phone video of the incident. Salerno had a pattern. He responded to tips about undocumented individuals without fully vetting the sourcing of those tips. He entered homes in situations where a more cautious agent would have secured a judicial warrant. And he tended to apply his most aggressive enforcement posture in Black and Latino neighborhoods, regardless of the socioeconomic character of those neighborhoods. A Black family in Gwinnett County had their home entered without a warrant in 2021. The father was detained for 2 hours before it was determined that everyone in the home was a U.S. citizen. Salerno received verbal counseling. A Latino couple in Cobb County had their apartment door forced open after Salerno determined that a neighbor's complaint constituted sufficient grounds for entry. No undocumented individuals were found. The couple sued. The case settled quietly for $85,000. A Haitian-American man in DeKalb County was handcuffed on his front lawn while his daughter watched from the window. He was a U.S. citizen. He'd been a citizen his entire life. His parents were naturalized. He had never had any immigration issue of any kind. Salerno's report described his initial refusal to open the door as suspicious behavior. 9 complaints in 6 years. That is not bad luck. That is not coincidence. That is a pattern that 6 different supervisors at the Atlanta ERO field office reviewed, documented, and declined to act upon with sufficient seriousness to stop what was coming. Salerno's partner that evening was Agent Travis Holt, 29 years old and 18 months into his ICE career. Holt had no prior complaint history. He would later cooperate fully with investigators. His name appears in this story because it belongs here, as a reminder that institutional patterns don't just corrupt experienced agents, they train new ones. The tip that sent them to Habersham Road came in at 4:52 p.m. that Thanksgiving evening. An anonymous caller told the ICE hotline that a specific address in Buckhead was harboring an undocumented individual. The tip was not corroborated. No follow-up investigation was conducted. No effort was made to verify the identity of the caller, the accuracy of the address, or the credibility of the claim. The tip was logged, assigned, and dispatched within 2 hours, on a federal holiday during dinner time, to an agent with 9 prior complaints. Salerno and Holt pulled up to 4312 Habersham Road at 6:38 p.m. Salerno stepped out of the vehicle, looked at the warm light behind the windows, the cars in the driveway, the wreath on the door, and made a decision. He walked to the front porch and knocked. Do you think ICE agents should face criminal charges, not just termination, for executing warrantless entries on American citizens' homes? Drop your answer below. Marcus Webb was drying his hands on a dish towel when he heard the knock. He walked to the front door and opened it. 2 federal agents in tactical vests stood on his porch. One was already reaching toward the doorframe as if he intended to hold it open. The other had his hand at his belt. Federal agents, open the door. Webb looked at them. He'd been here before, not at his own door, but in courtrooms, reading case files, listening to witnesses describe this exact moment when authority appears at a threshold without invitation. I need to see a warrant. Salerno's posture stiffened. We have information that there's an undocumented individual at this address. Webb's voice was steady. This is my home. Every person in this house is a citizen of the United States. You have the wrong address. Now I need to see a warrant before you take another step. Behind Webb, in the hallway, his daughter Amara had appeared. 8 years old, still in the dress she'd worn to dinner, looking at the men at the door. Sir, step aside. I will not step aside. This is my home. Do you have a warrant? We don't need a warrant for this type of enforcement action. This is where training fails and arrogance takes over. Salerno had been told at some point in some agency training about the knock and announce rule, about the requirements of the Fourth Amendment, about the limited exceptions to the warrant requirement. But somewhere in 6 years of acting without sufficient consequence, those legal frameworks had been reduced to obstacles rather than protections. Things that applied to other agents in cleaner situations, not to him on a tip he'd decided was credible. You need to step aside. My name is Marcus Webb. I am a senior trial attorney with the United States Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. I have litigated Fourth Amendment violations for 18 years. You do not have the legal authority to enter this home without a warrant. I am telling you that directly, as a federal officer, and I am giving you the opportunity to correct this before it becomes something none of us can walk back from. Salerno blinked. Something shifted in his expression. Not recognition, not reconsideration, but a harder kind of dismissal. The kind that arrives when someone has decided that the person in front of them doesn't belong to the category they're claiming. I don't care if you're the Attorney General. We have authority to enter under. You do not. There is no exigent circumstance here. There is no consent. There is no judicial warrant. Read me the statute you're relying on right now. Step back, sir. I am not stepping back. This is my home. My children are inside. You will not enter this home without a warrant. Should federal agents be required to produce and read a judicial warrant aloud before any entry into a private residence? Let me know what you think. Salerno looked at Holt. Something passed between them. A decision that had already been made before they got out of the car. Salerno put his hand on the door and pushed. Webb didn't move. He had 48 years of life in his body and 18 years of the law in his mind. And in that moment, he made a calculated choice. He was not going to make this easy, and he was not going to make it fast, because the longer this played out at the threshold, the more his family had time to see what was happening, and the more witnesses would accumulate. From the hallway, his wife Nadia appeared. She saw the agents. She looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back at her with an expression that said, "Get the children upstairs. Get your phone. Start recording." Nadia Webb understood immediately. She was a physician. She dealt with life-threatening situations by gathering data. She went upstairs, got Amara, knocked on Jonah's door, and came back with her cell phone recording. By the time Salerno forced his way through the doorway, there were 4 cell phones recording in that house. Salerno's hand came down on Marcus Webb's arm. Webb did not pull away. He stood still and spoke clearly to the room, to his family, to the phones, to the record. I am being entered against my will by federal agents who have produced no warrant. I have identified myself as a federal prosecutor. I am not consenting to this entry. I am not resisting. I am documenting. Holt at least had the decency to look uncertain. He stood in the doorway, 1 foot in and 1 foot out, as if his body understood what his orders hadn't told him, that something was wrong here. Salerno moved further into the foyer. Is there anyone in this house who is not a United States citizen? Every person in this house is a United States citizen, Webb said. And when this is over, you are both going to wish you had listened to me on the porch. At the table, Marcus's mother-in-law was standing. His brother Raymond had appeared from the kitchen. His cousins had moved from the dining room to the hallway entrance. 14 Americans watched 2 federal agents move through their Thanksgiving without a piece of paper authorizing them to do so. Salerno reached for his handcuffs. This is where authority becomes weapon. This is where the legal fiction of enforcement, that agents act within law, that training holds, that accountability shapes behavior, collides with the reality of what happens when patterns are permitted to continue until they reach a moment like this one. A federal prosecutor in his own home, on a national holiday, being handcuffed while his 8-year-old daughter watches from the stairs. He's being arrested, Amara said. Her voice was quiet and factual in the way children's voices are when they're describing something they don't yet have language to fully process. Daddy's being arrested. Nadia Webb was still recording. Her hands were not shaking. Later, in her deposition, she would explain why. I'm a cardiologist. When something terrible happens, you don't freeze. You document and you act. I documented. Webb was handcuffed. He remained calm. His voice remained even. I am Marcus Webb, I am a DOJ attorney. I am handcuffed without warrant in my own home. The date is Thanksgiving. The time is approximately 6:47 p.m. There are 4 recording devices capturing this. My name is in the Federal Attorney Directory. My credentials are upstairs. My office number is 404-581-6000. Call it. Deputy Director Patricia Okafor had been with ICE's Atlanta District for 24 years. She had risen from field agent to deputy director through a career defined by exactly the kind of institutional judgment that Salerno had spent 6 years demonstrating he lacked. She was the person you called when something had gone wrong, because she had the authority to stop it from getting worse and the experience to understand immediately how bad it already was. She got the call at 7:11 p.m. One of Marcus Webb's brothers had found the ice field office non-emergency line and conveyed in very direct terms that an agent had handcuffed a DOJ attorney at his Thanksgiving dinner table without a warrant. Okafor was in her car within 4 minutes. She arrived at 43112 Habersham at 7:24 p.m. She walked through the door and took in the scene. Marcus Webb, sitting in his own living room with his hands cuffed behind him. His wife standing with her phone still recording. 2 children visible on the staircase. And Salerno standing in the middle of the room with the particular expression of someone who has begun to understand the architecture of what they've done. Okafor looked at Salerno. What is the basis for entry? Anonymous tip. Subject may be harboring undocumented. Do you have a warrant? We assessed exigent. Do you have a warrant? Salerno said nothing. Okafor turned to Marcus Webb. She looked at him, professionally dressed, hands cuffed, sitting in his own home, and something in her expression went very still. Sir, can you tell me your name and occupation? Marcus Webb, Senior Trial Attorney, Civil Rights Division, United States Department of Justice. 18 years of service. I told your agent both of those things on my porch. Okafor walked to the front closet where Marcus directed her. She opened it, found the briefcase, and unclipped the DOJ credential badge. She examined it for approximately 4 seconds. She turned back to Salerno. Her voice dropped to something that the witnesses later described as quiet and final. Remove the handcuffs. Now. Salerno unlocked the cuffs. Marcus Webb brought his hands forward, rubbed his wrists. The marks from the metal were visible. Okafor set her badge on the mantel. Badge and credentials. You're both on administrative leave effective this moment. Neither of you is to speak to anyone about this incident until you've spoken to legal counsel and to internal affairs. Do you understand me? Salerno's face had gone the color of old paper. This is the moment it becomes real. Not when the handcuffs go on the wrong person, but when someone with authority tells you this is over. I was acting on a filed tip. Agency protocol. You handcuffed a federal prosecutor in front of his children on Thanksgiving without a warrant. Give me your badge. Salerno handed it over. Holt handed his over without being asked. Okafor turned to Marcus Webb, and then to the room, to Nadia, to the family watching from the hallway and the stairs, to Amara, who was still on the 3rd step looking down at the adults. Mr. Webb. On behalf of the Department of Homeland Security and ICE's Atlanta District, I am sincerely and unreservedly sorry. What happened here tonight was a violation of your rights, your family's rights, and federal law. I want you to know that I am initiating an emergency internal review tonight, that both agents will be referred for criminal investigation, and that you will have my direct contact information before I leave this house. Marcus Webb looked at her for a long moment. I appreciate that, Deputy Director. I want you to know that I have spent 18 years in the Civil Rights Division prosecuting exactly this pattern of behavior. I know what comes next. I am going to make sure that what happened here tonight results in real consequences, not just for these 2 agents, but for every supervisor who reviewed 9 complaints and sent Agent Salerno back into the field anyway. He paused, My daughter is 8 years old. She watched federal agents handcuff her father in her own home on Thanksgiving. So no, an apology tonight is not where this ends. Should ICE agents who conduct warrantless entries on American citizens' homes face automatic criminal referral? Drop your answer. Within 90 minutes of the agent's arrival at Habersham Road, 4 separate videos had been posted to social media. One from Nadia Webb's phone, one from Marcus's brother Raymond, one from a cousin who had stood at the hallway entrance the entire time, and one from Jonah Webb, 14 years old, who had recorded from the top of the stairs on a phone he'd silently retrieved from his room while the confrontation was still ongoing. Jonah's video was the clearest. It showed the entire confrontation from the foyer through the living room. Salerno's entry, the handcuffs, Marcus's calm statements for the record, Amara on the stairs, his mother standing at the dining room doorway with her hand over her mouth. By midnight, every video had over 100,000 views. By morning, they had been seen by millions. ICE agents, handcuff, federal prosecutor at Thanksgiving dinner without warrant, DOJ, attorney arrested by ICE in own home while children watch Thanksgiving, while black. Federal agents enter Buckhead, home without warrant, handcuff dad in front of 8-year-old Chi. The ACLU released a statement within hours, calling the incident one of the most egregious documented Fourth Amendment violations of the decade. The Congressional Black Caucus demanded an immediate DOJ investigation, a demand that carried unusual weight given that the victim was himself a DOJ attorney. The Atlanta Bar Association issued a formal condemnation. Civil rights organizations across the country were calling it a landmark incident. Deputy Director Okafor, true to her word, initiated the internal review that night. By Friday morning, she had referred both agents for criminal investigation. The anonymous tip that had sent them to Habersham Road was traced within 48 hours to a burner phone purchased at a gas station in Marietta. The call was later determined to be a swatting-style harassment call, almost certainly malicious. There had never been any undocumented individual at 4312 Habersham Road. There had never been any credible basis for the tip. The entire enforcement action had been predicated on a fabricated anonymous complaint that a properly conducted pre-entry investigation would have invalidated. Marcus Webb retained counsel within 24 hours. Though given his 18 years of civil rights litigation, he was among the most qualified individuals in the country to understand exactly what his case was worth. The lawsuit named Agent Derek Salerno, Agent Travis Holt, the Atlanta ICE Enforcement and Removal Operations Field Office, 3 supervising officers who had reviewed and closed prior complaints against Salerno without adequate action, and the Department of Homeland Security. The claims were comprehensive and devastating. Unlawful entry in violation of the Fourth Amendment, false arrest and false imprisonment, violation of federal civil rights under 42 U.S.C., Section 1983, racial profiling and discriminatory enforcement, use of excessive force, the handcuffing of a non-resisting individual with no criminal history and no legal basis for arrest, intentional infliction of emotional distress with particular attention to the impact on the minor children present, failure to verify credentials despite repeated, clear, and professional identification, failure to supervise an agent with 9 prior complaints over 6 years, failure to properly vet and corroborate anonymous tips before dispatching enforcement agents, and deliberate indifference to the constitutional rights of American citizens. The United States Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Georgia opened a parallel criminal investigation. The charges under consideration included unlawful entry, deprivation of rights under color of law under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, conspiracy against rights under 18 U.S.C. Section 241, and civil rights violations carrying maximum sentences totaling more than 35 years in federal prison. That number, 35 years, became the figure that attached itself to the story because it was the same kind of number Marcus Webb had cited in prosecuting other agents, in other cases, before other juries, in 18 years of civil rights work. DHS's attorneys reviewed the evidence. Every frame of 4 separate videos, every statement made by the 14 witnesses present, the full complaint history of Agent Salerno, the traced tip, the absence of any warrant application, the absence of any exigent circumstances, the presence of a federal prosecutor who had identified himself clearly, repeatedly, and professionally before the forced entry. The government settled 11 months after the incident. The United States paid $4.7 million to Marcus and Nadia Webb, with additional compensation for the documented psychological impact on both minor children, particularly Amara, who had begun experiencing anxiety and sleep disturbances following the incident. Agent Derek Salerno was terminated 7 weeks after Thanksgiving. The termination letter was direct, comprehensive, and entered into his permanent federal record. Agent Salerno conducted a warrantless forced entry into the private residence of a United States citizen on the basis of an unverified anonymous tip, refused to accept lawful identification from the homeowner who had identified himself as a federal attorney, applied physical restraint without legal authority, and did so in a manner consistent with a documented pattern of civil rights violations that had been reviewed and insufficiently addressed across 9 prior complaints, spanning 6 years of employment. This conduct constitutes a fundamental breach of the constitutional standards every federal agent is obligated to uphold. Employment is terminated, effective immediately. Salerno's name was entered into federal personnel records in a manner that permanently barred him from employment in any federal law enforcement capacity. His career ended at age 34. Agent Holt was placed on a 24-month probationary status and reassigned to a non-enforcement role. 3 supervisors who had reviewed and closed prior Salerno complaints without escalation were formally reprimanded. 2 were demoted. Dylan, the fictitious managerial character from prior scripts, doesn't apply here. The closest equivalent is the tip screener at the ICE hotline who approved dispatch without corroboration. That screener was reassigned to a different unit pending review of hotline verification protocols. Should federal agencies that settle civil rights lawsuits be required to make the full internal complaint history of involved agents publicly available? Let me know in the comments. Marcus Webb testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee 6 months after Thanksgiving. His testimony was precise, controlled, and devastating in the way that only the testimony of an 18-year federal litigator can be. Every sentence built on the one before it, and every pause was deliberate. I am a senior trial attorney at the United States Department of Justice. I have spent 18 years in the Civil Rights Division prosecuting Fourth Amendment violations. I know the law on warrantless entry better than almost anyone in this room. He paused. On Thanksgiving evening, 2 federal agents arrived at my home without a warrant and demanded entry. I identified myself. I cited the applicable law. I told them clearly and professionally exactly what they were doing wrong and exactly how to stop. They entered anyway. They handcuffed me in my own living room in front of my wife, my children, and 10 members of my extended family. His voice remained even. I want this committee to understand something. I did everything right. I was calm. I was professional. I cited the statute. I offered my credentials. I gave those agents every opportunity to make a different decision. And none of it mattered, because they had made their decision before they knocked on my door. And my credentials, my title, my 18 years of federal service, none of that was sufficient to override whatever assumption brought them to my porch in the first place. He looked at the committee members. I am a federal prosecutor. My DOJ identification was in the House. My name is in the Federal Attorney Directory. I litigate these exact cases for a living, and I was still handcuffed in front of my daughter. Another pause. Longer this time. My daughter is 8 years old. Her name is Amara. She had nightmares for 3 months after Thanksgiving. She started asking whether federal agents could come back. She started asking whether the door was locked. She is 8 years old. He leaned slightly forward. Agent Salerno had 9 prior complaints. 9. In 6 years. 7 of them involved the same pattern. Warrantless entries, insufficient basis, American citizens detained without cause. And he was still dispatched to my home. Still in the field. Still given a badge and authority and the implicit message from 6 years of insufficient consequence that his judgment was acceptable. His voice strengthened. That is the story. Not just what happened to me, because I have resources, because I understand the law, because I was able to fight back in ways that most people cannot. The story is the 9 complaints. The story is every supervisor who reviewed those complaints and decided that training was sufficient. The story is every family, without federal credentials, without attorneys, without 18 years of civil rights litigation in their professional history, who experienced exactly what my family experienced and had no recourse. He looked directly at the committee chair. If this can happen to me, in my own home, on a federal holiday, with my DOJ badge upstairs, what happens to people who don't have what I have? What happens to them? The chamber was quiet. Should repeated civil rights complaints against federal agents trigger mandatory automatic criminal investigation rather than internal review? Drop your answer. This was not just a wrongful entry. This was not just 2 agents making a bad call on a Thanksgiving evening. This was the terminal consequence of a system that reviewed 9 complaints in 6 years and decided 9 separate times that retraining was a sufficient response to civil rights violations. Agent Salerno's record told the story his supervisors chose not to read. Every complaint described the same failure. Insufficient basis, wrong address, wrong person, no warrant, American citizens detained and humiliated. Every complaint was reviewed, filed, and resolved with a mechanism designed to create the appearance of accountability without producing its substance. Training requirements satisfied but never meaningfully assessed. Counseling documented but never enforced. Supervisors noting concerns in performance reviews but taking no action that altered the pattern. 9 complaints in 6 years. That is not bad luck. That is not a series of isolated mistakes. That is a pattern that was documented, reviewed, and permitted by supervisors who either didn't read the files carefully enough or read them and decided that the operational value of a productive field agent outweighed the civil rights of the citizens that agent was violating. Agent Salerno's career is over. That's consequence. The government paid $4.7 million. That's accountability. 3 supervisors were demoted. That's institutional response. But none of those outcomes restore Thanksgiving to the Webb family. None of them give Amara Webb back the 3 months of nightmares. None of them undo the message delivered to every member of that household at 6:38 p.m. on a national holiday. That no credential, no title, no professional status, and no legal argument is guaranteed to protect you when the person with authority has already decided who you are. The real question is, what changes now? Does ICE finally implement a mandatory judicial warrant requirement for residential entries in non-exigent circumstances without exception? Does the Department of Homeland Security finally create an enforcement mechanism that removes agents after 3 substantiated civil rights complaints rather than permitting the accumulation of 9? Does the anonymous tip hotline finally require minimum corroboration standards before dispatching enforcement agents to residential addresses? Do we finally acknowledge that the same federal enforcement machinery built to protect national security can, in the wrong hands, without sufficient accountability, become an instrument of constitutional violation against the very citizens it exists to serve? Because if we don't fix the supervision system that kept Salerno in the field through 9 complaints, if we don't address the tip verification failures that sent agents to a Thanksgiving dinner based on an unverified anonymous call. If we don't create consequences that arrive earlier in the pattern rather than after the lawsuit, then we are simply waiting for the next agent, the next family, the next holiday, and the next 8-year-old asking whether federal agents can come back. Comment below if you believe this should be law. Any federal agent who conducts a warrantless residential entry that results in the detention of an American citizen must face automatic criminal referral to an independent prosecutor within 72 hours, with no internal review period, no supervisory discretion, and no agency buffer between the complaint and the investigation. And if you believe these stories need to be told, if you believe that accountability doesn't begin at a settlement press release, but at the first complaint that gets filed and then filed away, then hit that subscribe button. We are not stopping. We are going to keep pulling the complaint records. We are going to keep reading the internal reviews. We are going to keep finding the 9 complaint agents who are still in the field. And we are going to keep demanding that power be held to the standard it demands of everyone else. This isn't about one agent or one family or one Thanksgiving. It's about every door, every household, every family that deserves the right to exist in their own home without proving they belong there. It's about all of us and the country we are willing to accept.